Hello YouTube and welcome to this tutorial on custom auditing within Dynamics CRM. So in this video we'll be walking through what custom auditing is, some of the things you need to watch out for, and lastly we'll be going through a code example. So custom auditing refers to the ability to record users' actions within Dynamics CRM in some kind of custom way. Users' actions include creates, updates, deletes, viewing records, querying records, assigning, etc. etc. Now there is auditing built into CRM, which when it's enabled will store audit logs in a special table, and these can be accessed by admins or exported. However, if you have a requirement to store these logs outside of CRM, for example for some legal or governmental reason, or because you want to maintain the logs after a database has been restored, or just because you want to see what users are viewing or querying, then you're going to need some form of custom auditing. So here is the massive disclaimer for this video and for what we're about to do. Any kind of custom auditing has an impact on your performance. You're essentially putting your code between the user pressing a button and seeing a result. Now I've seen many systems where people have tried to implement this and have caused huge impacts on their users to the point where a 200 user system couldn't cope with more than 5 people. So my first recommendation is to push back on any requirement for custom auditing on your project in the first place. If you can avoid doing it, don't do it. If that's not possible, and you do need to implement this, then here are some broad tips to follow. Try to make no calls to CRM. If you do need to make calls, then cache the data. I've made previous videos that you can watch that show you exactly how to implement caches. Make the code as lightweight as possible, remembering that every single time a user does something, it's going to hit your code. And also make the plugin synchronous. Now it might sound like a good idea to make the action asynchronous so as not to impact the user, but because of the frequency of your plugin being hit and the impact on the system for setting up an asynchronous job by CRM, it actually works out not to be worth it at all. So if you've decided to go ahead with custom auditing, then we're going to walk through a simple way to implement it without minimal impact on your system. So here we are in Visual Studio. I've gone ahead and created a new plugin. This one's called Audit, and in our execute method here we are grabbing the entity from the target, and then we're setting up this custom object here called log. So what this log actually contains is the date and time of when the audit was captured, the entity that was being requested, the ID of that entity, the message name, which will be your create, your read, your update, your delete, or your retrieve multiple, and the user ID of the user who made the request. And we're also actually getting the username here. So we're using the user cache that we created in the very first video on how to set up a cache. It's just down to show a way of implementing the cache within this audit as well. So we're getting the username there. One additional thing we're doing here is that if the message is a retrieve or isn't a retrieve or retrieve multiple, we're actually going through the target entity that's come through, and we're actually creating a key value pair of all of the attributes which are either as part of the create or as part of an update. So what CRM does is when it sends through the entity into your plugin, it only contains the attributes that have either changed if it's an update or was set as part of the create. So what we can do here is just loop through each one of them and then add them to this changed values dictionary that I've got set up here. And you'll notice here I've got a convert to string function that I've set up. This is just a little helper which I can show you here. Depending on the type that comes through, it will just output the string value. So for example, if it's an option set, a money, date, time, it will just get the correct value and return it. This is not complete, so I've left an incomplete tag here. If you are downloading this code, you will need to go through and properly implement this function. So what we do is once we've got this object set up for our log, so we pass it through to this send log function. This function can be completely stripped out and can be used for whatever you need to do with your auditing. For me, I'm actually converting our object to JSON and then sending it as a string to a web service. So here we have the serializer as well as the stream. We're right into the object, and then we're using a reader to just get the JSON string from this. And then I've left a comment here. This is where you would implement your web request going off to any server, or if you were on premise, for example, and you wanted to write to a file system, this is where you would implement that as well. So that's our very simple auditing plugin created. It's fairly lightweight. It uses a cache to maintain data, so we're not hitting CRM constantly. It's not doing anything particularly heavyweight, so we shouldn't be impacting the users in any lengthy way. To actually use this plugin, what we would do is register it on the events in CRM that we actually wanted to audit. So, for example, you'd open the plugin registration tool and then select maybe the contact entity, and then you would say, I want to audit when somebody creates, when somebody updates, performs a retrieve or retrieve multiple. There is actually a slightly different way that we can register this plugin. In the plugin registration tool, you're able to register a plugin on a particular entity, or you can actually register it on all by leaving the value blank. If you're to do this, then this plugin will actually fire on every single entity. Now, using this, we could actually allow a user to configure which entity should be audited and which one shouldn't be, because obviously we don't want to audit every single entity in the system, otherwise we're just going to slow it down. Now, the way we do this is to implement a cache here. So this is using the singleton pattern again, and I've actually added a string list here of entities to audit. And what we do is we call a function called shouldAudit, and we pass in the name of the entity from our plugin, as well as the service. And then we go off and we get the list from CRM, and I've called this audit entities, and we're just grabbing the name. And this will allow a user to create a record which has basically got a single name field in there with the name of the entity they want to audit. And obviously we're only getting this when the value is null, so it is being cached properly. And then we're returning whether or not this list contains our value. So if we go back to this plugin here, and just after we've got the context, if we would have a check like this, so we're saying our cache.instance.shouldAudit, pass in the name of the entity, and as well as the service, then effectively what we've done is registered this plugin on every single entity within the system, and when it fires, we will check and see if we should be auditing, and if we should, we will follow our normal process. But if we shouldn't, it will just exit immediately. Now, although registering the audit in this particular way is easier from a development point of view, and it's more configurable from an organization point of view, you've got to remember that your plugin will be firing on every single entity in the system, so it will have drawbacks. Anyway, this is our audit plugin complete. I will leave the code in the description, or a link to the code in the description. Leave any comments that you have in the comment section below, like if you like, and I will see you in the next tutorial.